Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you're having a great day. Today in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build a contact form. And additionally, it also has some validation. So let me just go ahead and show you what we are building. So over here we have a form. And if you were to try to submit this form without providing any input, it's going to show some red boxes around the input boxes. And then also it's going to display this little error hint tag or text down here. And if you were to fill in all the forms correctly, so let's type in a random email and also type in a phone number. And then finally a message, we love your product. So something like that. And after you fill this in, if you were to click the submit form button, it basically shows you a thank you message. And we have some placeholder code to kind of send that information over to a backend. We aren't going to be actually doing any backend related stuff. This is all a front-end tutorial. So if you're new to JavaScript, new to programming, I would definitely stick around because we're going to be doing some HTML, some styling, and then finally some JavaScript to kind of get this all going. And then the last thing I'll mention is that we're not using any libraries or frameworks. So this is all just vanilla JS. So I think it's a really good learning opportunity if you are new to learning JavaScript. All right, so let's just go ahead and get started. So let me just go ahead and walk you through some initial setup. You can see here I have a folder with 3 files. I have index.html, index.js, and style.css. So if I just go ahead and scaffold out the index.html, I should be able to view it over here. And just to verify that, let's just print out something. So hello world. And that is working. And so secondly, in this index file, we want to do 2 things. We want to first bring in our JavaScript. So I can do a tag called script source, and I could try to bring in index.js so that the JavaScript can run when the page loads. And then secondly, we want to bring in our style sheet. So I can say link::CSS, and I could just say style.css, and that'll bring in our style sheet as well. Just to verify this is working, I could just style the body a little bit and say like background color is green, and we're good to go. So let's get rid of the margin on the body because that's going to be kind of annoying. So we got our 3 files and we should be good to go. Now there's a couple of steps that I'm going to just go ahead and copy and paste in because these are things that I don't know off the top of my head. I found them on either Stack Overflow or as an example, CSS snippet. So the first thing I'm going to paste in is I want to bring in a Google Web Font. So this will really help with styling and making the text look a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in above my link here. And we can use it by simply saying font family Lato, I believe. So let me go over to my CSS and say font family is Lato. Actually, in fact, I think I need to add sans serif after it. So if you see here, as I save, it'll show me the Lato font. The second thing I'm going to paste in is a snippet for checking if an email or a phone is valid, right? This is just some regex I found in Stack Overflow, but we're going to be using it later on. So I figured it would be good to just go ahead and paste that into our JavaScript so that we can use. And if you don't know regex, you can read up on it or learn a tutorial about it, but kind of complicated, but really just checks a string to make sure it matches a particular format. And then secondly, or the last thing, I just want to bring in this style, which we are going to be using. All right, so that was kind of our boilerplate, paste code in, no shame there, because I don't know all of this stuff off the top of my head. So let's just go ahead and get started with building out the contact us form. All right, so let's just go ahead and start with building out that gradient contact us banner at the top. So inside of our body, and by the way, disregard these. These are just so I know if my face cam is probably going to be blocking code. So I need to try to keep in mind to keep the code near the top of my screen. So anyway, in my body, I'm going to add a div with a class of contact us. And that div needs to have a couple of things. The first thing it needs to have would be a header, which says contact us. And if I save that, you'll see it pop up over here. And just as a reminder, sometimes you want to have your dev tools opened up with your cache disabled. So in order to turn off your cache, you want to go to your network tab and click disable cache, or else sometimes your browser is just going to save on to old styles, old HTML, old JavaScript, and you're going to run into a lot of bugs. But anyway, let's just go ahead and close that down a little bit so it doesn't get in the way. So we got a div up here with a contact us, and we need to also add a paragraph tag that says, we'd love to hear from you. Do exclamation mark, please send us a message. I don't know. I'm not good at writing type or copy or whatever it's called. So let's just go with that and let's see how it goes. So now the next step is, since we have the HTML, we can actually try to start styling it. So let's go to our style CSS sheet and we are going to just start styling that class of contact us. So I'm going to do that, comment this out, move it up, and that should style that little div. And on top of all that, we want to just add maybe some color to the text to make it white so it's easier to read. Maybe some font size to the text so it's, again, easier. And then I think some padding would make it really easy to use as well. So now we got a nice little banner. We know what page we're on. We know what we're trying to, tell the user what to do. You could probably spend more time giving this more love to, make it more user-friendly. But hey, I think that works. Okay, so now that we have the green Contact Us banner, let's just go ahead and start working on the form. So underneath the Contact Us, we could just do a form element. And that basically is used for keeping all your inputs together inside a collection so that when you do a submission to the backend, it can take all the names of your inputs and push them over. That's more of an advanced talk, but for right now, we're going to make a form. And we're going to start in just doing one of the input fields and try to add error text and error styling and just try to add some validation and just do that. And then come back and kind of do the same for all the other inputs. This is just going to be a lot of copying and pasting at that point. So the first input box we care about is the full name of the person who's trying to contact us. So I'm going to make a div and give it a class name of form group. And this is just to kind of wrap all the elements that are related to the input box, the full name input box together so we can style them. And inside of this, we're going to have a couple of things. The first thing we need is a label, and that label can say full name. I'll go ahead and save that. We see full name pop up here. And what else we need? We need a input box, and we also need a div, maybe with a class name of error hint, and that could say your name is required. All right, so we have the start of a cool form, but we need to style it because it looks pretty ugly in my opinion. So let's just go ahead here, go into our style sheet, and let's just start styling the form. So first of all, let's add some padding to our form to make it match the same, padding of this form. So 40 on the left, 40 on the top. And we can start styling the label first. So I'm going to say, let's style the form groups label. So we could do some type of nested selection here and just anything that has a form group class, the children of that class, target the label and start applying some styles. So what I'm going to do for the label is give it a display of block, because right now I believe it's an inline block. And that'll allow us to do some margin and stuff on it later. And right now the font size is really small in my opinion, so I think maybe a font size of 20 might be better. Maybe a margin bottom of 10 to give it more spacing between the input box and the name. And we could also start styling the input box because I think that looks okay. You could spend hours just changing styles and stuff. Maybe 24 might look nicer. So next I want to style this input box. So let's just go ahead and start doing some stylings for that. So I'm going to do form group and then input. And I could give this a width of 320 and maybe some padding of 10 just to make it look nicer. And the font is probably going to be really small, so maybe give it some font size to match the label, or maybe a little bit smaller than the label. So now if I type into it, we could see, and then sometimes it's nice to add kind of a really light gray instead of black, just so it's not so abrupt. Maybe do that to all the black text. But anyway, so what would be nice here is we have some placeholder text, which would tell the user what actually needs to be here, like an example of what they type in. So I'm going to go over to the input here and I'll add a placeholder and I'll say your first and last name. Can't type right now. All right, so now let's just do an example of what this input box will look like if there was a validation error. So I'm going to add a class to this called invalid just to kind of visualize what an invalid input box will look like. And I can say input.invalid and give it a border of 1 pixel solid red. So that is what we're trying to achieve when there's an invalid input put here. And down here, your name is required. It'll probably be good to style this red. and also add maybe some margin between the input box and this hint. So if I go here, I'm just going to add some margin bottom of 4 pixels a little bit. And then I'm going to say error hint color red. All right, so I think that is a good enough styling of like what it would look like if there was an error on the page. And what we should do as well is we should probably add a button down here for submitting the form. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to add a button inside the form, and it's going to be called submit form, or just submit. Who knows? Maybe submit message. Maybe that'll make more sense. And so let's just go ahead and style this as well. And it'll probably make sense to add some type of like horizontal rolling. So we can go ahead and just style those. So the HR, I can give it a height of like 1 pixel, and give it a background color of whatever green this is. Let's just try to figure out what green that is. And let's just go ahead and add border none to this. And that should make it look a little bit better. So it's a little green line, just to kind of add some extra styling. So what we should do is probably add some margin bottom to this. Do like 40 pixels, or maybe 20. And maybe some margin top to it as well, just to kind of move it away. No, I think 30 might be a better option. All right, anyway, to the fun part. Let's do the button. The button could have some padding on it. We could do 10 pixels and see how that looks. We could give it a bigger font size. And we could give it a background color of none. Or maybe it's background of none. Yep, there we go. And then border of none as well. Actually, we do want a border. Let's just make it that green that we did up here. So we'll do a 1 pixel solid green. And we do want rounded edges. So one way you could do that is border radius of, do 5 pixels and see how that looks. And maybe 10 pixels. That looks pretty good. And then when you actually hover over it, what we want to do is change the background color to this green, and maybe change the border in the color of the text to white. So what I can do is say button, make sure this isn't hidden by my webcam. I say button, hover, and then we want to set the background color to that green. We want to make the border a black, and the color could be a white. And then we could also do a transition and say all 1 second, just so it slowly changes the color of the button like this. And that's a little too slow, so let me just go ahead and do that. Change it to 0.5 seconds and add a cursor. So that doesn't look too bad. So I'm actually going to change the text to submit form. And then maybe scale down the text a little bit. All right, so let's just go ahead and... All right, so I changed the text here, and over here, what I'm going to do is just make the font size a little bit smaller. So maybe 20 pixels or something. All right, so it doesn't look too bad. So let's just go ahead and move on to how do we actually do form validation. So what we want to do is we want to get rid of the initial error and hide this. So we want to hide this text. And what we could do is just add a class to it called like hidden, I guess. And we don't want this invalid class on this one either. So we haven't defined what hidden is. So let's just define what hidden is. And I'll say display of none. So now we could just dynamically add hidden or remove hidden if we wanted to remove that error text. And then same with this, we could add the class of invalid to the input box to make it show red or not. Okay, so now to the fun part. We can start moving on to a little bit of JavaScript to do some validation to make sure that someone typed what they needed to type in into this input box. So let's go ahead and open up the JavaScript file. And again, we have these two functions that we're going to use for phone numbers and emails. But let's just go ahead and grab some of the DOM elements out of the page so we can actually use them. So in this case, I'm going to say name input is equal to document.query selector. And then I want to grab the input box that has a particular name attached to it. So in this case, we didn't add a name. So we can go over here and add a name, and we can just call this input box, I guess, full name if we wanted to. I'll just name it name to keep it simple. So now that gives us the ability to query for this element using document.querySelector. So I can say, grab me the input element that has a name of name. And just to verify that we actually got that, I'm just going to go ahead and print it out real quick. And notice that we do get that input box out. So the second thing I'm going to do is I want to grab the actual form element itself. So if I say const form is equal to document.query selector of form, that'll give us the form, and that's going to allow us to add a event listener. So when someone tries to submit the form, we can do something. So let's go ahead and move on to that. So on the form element itself, I'm going to say form.add event listener, and I will say listen to the submit event. And when someone tries to submit the form by either clicking this button or pressing enter on the last field, we can, first of all, do e.prevent default so the page doesn't refresh. And let's just make sure we're getting here. All right, so as we click on the button, and also as we press enter here, we are seeing that we are getting to this callback function. So what we want to do is we want to verify that the input field has some type of value typed into it. So we could, inside of this callback listener, basically just check if name input.value has a value, then we're good. Otherwise, we need to probably display those errors. So let's just make a function that can kind of help us out. So I'm going to say validate inputs here. And what I'm going to do is just check if name input.value is not defined, then we have some type of errors, okay? So in this case, what we can do is we can say name input.next element sibling, and then we can grab that error hint that we have hidden right now. So I could say, well, that will be the error hint, and then I could just basically say class list.remove hidden. So now that we have this little helper function we can use, let's just go ahead and call it instead of printing out to the console. And that should check and print out that little error text if we haven't entered some text here. So I'm going to type in submit form and see that that pops up, which is pretty cool. So we also need to show this border around the input box and give it a invalid class. So what I'm going to do is say name input.classlist.add, and I'll say invalid. So now if I do it again, I'm going to highlight both of those. So that's pretty easy to get going. And instead of doing this, you could have named that error hint and been more like specific, but this is just a shortcut way if I know that in the DOM that they're going to be directly after each other. It's a little bit brittle, but it'll work for this little tutorial. So now when someone types into here, notice that it's still red, and that is not what we want. So what we want to do is add an event listener to the input box, and if it changes, we can just call validate inputs one more time. So I'm going to say name input.add event listener, and then if something is typed into it, I can do the input event, and I'll just go ahead and type call validate inputs again. All right, so now that we added that event listener to that input box, when I have errors and I type into the input, it's still not going away, and that's because we need to actually do something in this else statement here. Or what we could do instead is just go ahead and remove these classes or add them back every time we do a validation. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to say name input.classlist.remove invalid. And then also I'm going to do this and just say add back hidden. So every time you revalidate your form, just add or remove those classes again. So let's try it one last time. Submit the form, start typing, and notice that the errors go away. And then at this point, if I click submit form, we could do like an AJAX request to a backend and send some data over and show like a success message. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say inside of the validate inputs, let's keep track of if there's an issue or not. Okay, so using a Boolean that I could declare up here, I could say let is form valid is equal to false. And if we call validate inputs, we could set it to true. And if any of these are false, we'll set it back to false. Okay. And then finally down here, we can say if the form is valid, then we can do like a request, or we could just remove the form and show that success message. So I'm just going to say form.remove for right now and just show you how that works. So I'm going to submit the form, type into it, submit it again, and notice that it cleared the form out, which will allow us to display the thank you message. Okay, so let's work on the thank you message, and then we can kind of add the other inputs. So for the thank you message, let's just go ahead and under the form, we can add a div, the class of thank you or something. And that could just have some text that says thank you for your feedback, exclamation mark. And we could just style that or make it hidden by default. So I'm going to put a hidden class on that. And actually, before I make it hidden, let's just style it and make it a little bit nicer to look at. So I'm going to style the thank you, and I'm going to say give it a padding of 40 pixels, font size of 32 pixels, and text align center. Cool. So now what we should do is just basically grab that DOM element up here. So I'll grab thank you from the page, query by the dot thank you. And what we need to do is just basically show it when we remove the form. So I'm going to say thank you dot class list dot remove hidden. All right, so let's try this. I'm going to add hidden back to that thank you field. And let's just try it. So I'm going to get some errors, type, hit submit, and it says thank you for your feedback. So that is basically how you do it with one input box. Now we could just copy and paste some stuff to get it working for the other input boxes as well. So let's just go ahead and move forward doing that. So let's just refresh the page here and let's start working on these other input boxes. So the next one we need is email. So I'm going to say email, and I could say name is email, and the placeholder is your email address. And again, we're going to have your email is invalid will be what we'll print out if someone types in a bad email. And one thing you'll notice is that underneath these form groups, we should probably add some margin. So I'm going to find the form group. And we don't have like a top level styling for the form group. So I'm just going to go ahead and create one and say margin bottom of 20 pixels and see how that looks. That looks okay. All right, so we did the email. We could just go ahead and copy a lot of the code here. So instead of just copy name input and say email input. Check for email, and then basically do the same logic here. So a lot of this logic could probably be pulled out into functions. So I'm going to move this up here, and you'll notice that for everything we're going to be doing the same, like add invalid or remove hidden. So let's just go ahead and write a helper function for that. So I'm going to say reset input. I'm going to take a element, and then we can just call these two methods. And then I'll call it with name input. And this needs to be elm. Okay. Call it reset elm instead. And then I'll make another helper function called invalidate elm. And again, that's going to take one argument called elm. And it can call these two things. So I will call invalidate elm and pass it name input. So hopefully this still works. If I have an error, it goes like that. And that just makes the code a little bit cleaner. So let's do the same thing with email. So I'm going to say reset elm of email input. And then I'm going to check to make sure if using that helper function we brought in, we could say email input dot value. And we could do is valid email up here. So let's just go ahead and call if is valid email is false for the value of our email text field. We could just invalidate the email input. All right, so let's try it again. And it looks like I probably didn't name something correctly. So let's just go back. So we named this email and we brought it back here, email input. And we reset it here and we invalidate it here. So let's just make sure we're not actually getting there. We are. So for some reason, invalidate elm is not working as we want it to. And that is because I did not copy paste error. I forgot to update those. So let's just go ahead and update those. So now if I were to submit that, notice that the event listener is not on the email one. So let's just go ahead and add that in. And copy this. So at this point, you'll probably notice, okay, we're doing a lot of copy and pasting for all these input fields. So let's just instead put all of these inside a single array called inputs. And I can say like name input, email input. Hopefully my webcam's not hiding that. And what we could do is basically loop through for each one and add an event listener to just validate the inputs. So we'll say inputs for each input. And then for each one, I'm going to add an event listener. and just basically do the same thing. So I don't have to keep copying and pasting this code over and over again. So let's make sure it works. Oh, it's not working because I don't have a valid email in, right? So if I actually put one, it's going to work now. So the last thing, not the last thing, but another thing I noticed is that on a clean state of the page, the moment you type something, it starts invalidating the other fields, which isn't really desirable. So what we want to do is add another Boolean that says like, is validation on, and set that to false. And then we don't want to do any type of validation until it's true. So I'm going to say, if it's not on, just go ahead and return. And we want to set it the moment you try to submit. So down here, the first time you do a submit, we could set it to true. So now when the page loads and we type, it's not going to try to validate both of those. It only validates them when you do the initial submission, okay? All right, cool. So let's do the other ones real quick and then wrap up this video. So I'm going to go ahead and add one for phone. Say your phone number. And then say your phone is invalid. And I'll add one more for the text area for the message. So instead of input here, it's going to be text area. We don't need empty classes on all these, so let's just go ahead and remove those. And that's going to say message. And that's just going to have a placeholder that says your message. The name will be message here. And your message is required. Could be the text for that. All right, so we didn't style the message at all. So let's make sure that we do that. And I think I have a missing div somewhere. Yeah, let me just do that. All right. Let's style the text area because we haven't done it. And in fact, the text area in the input should probably be really similar. So let's find where we style the input right here. And instead of input, we could do input, comma, text area. And they should both be styled the same way. Now the text area probably needs to be a little bit bigger. So I can make the width like 500 pixels or something. And maybe a fixed height of 300 pixels. That's a little much. Try 200. All right, so now we just need to make sure we do the validation for these two. All right, so same approach as last time, except for we are going to be doing a different validator. So I'm going to copy this and use phone. And this will be called phone input. And we could add that to our inputs list so that the event listener is going to check when you type. And we could just make sure we reset it here. In fact, we could do a for each here. We could inputs for each input, and then we could just reset it. So I could say reset elm. How about that? That'll clean that part up a little bit. And then we also want to check the validation on the phone. So is valid phone. And then that's going to be past phone input with a value. And then we could just make sure that we invalidate that. So let's make sure this works. And if you type in a real phone number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I guess it needs a real area code. Okay, so that works. And finally, the message. We haven't done the message yet, so let's go back up and make sure we do that message input. So I'm going to do a message input. And that's going to be called message here. Put that in our inputs list. And then we just need to check it to make sure it's defined. So I could just say message input dot value, make sure it actually has a value, and then we need to invalidate it afterwards. I think I have an error over here, so let's check this out. Not read property class list of null. I think it's failing to get this message input. Oh, because I'm querying for input instead of text area. Let's do that. And I will go to my console and clear that out. All right, so let's submit the form. And now when I type stuff in, do my email, we could do a phone. And then finally a message. And submit it. All right, so my child woke up, so this is going to be the end of this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. If you thought this was useful, be sure to subscribe and leave a like.